Open access is defined as research outputs such as journal articles, books, scientific data, conference proceedings, and they're available online with no restrictions and on access, and no or limited restrictions on use other than requiring acknowledgement of the original author. So as you said, it's absolutely game-changing, and it's certainly had more traction in Europe, and it's well on its way here.
This is Associations Thrive, the podcast celebrating successful associations and their leaders. I'm your host, Joanna Pineda, CEO and Chief Troublemaker at Matrix Group International. Listen in as top association executives tell all, revealing the creative and innovative ways they're increasing membership, generating revenue, nurturing engagement, and reimagining their organizations. By the way, if you've launched a new initiative, created new member services, or updated your governance structure and are seeing great results, I want to hear your story, and so do my listeners. I'd love to have you as a guest. Go to podcast.matrixgroup.net and apply to be on Associations Thrive. Now let's dive into this week's show. Today is a really special episode. I'm here in Cleveland at the American Society of Association Executives Annual Conference. I'm actually on the expo floor, and I am joined by Sharon Kneebone, who's CEO of the American Academy of Pain Medicine. Sharon, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much.
Sharon, you and I did a session along with Lyn Beamesderfer, Dave Jackson, and Pam Harley, and we did a session on open access for journals. Now, open access is kind of a really interesting, important, and potentially life-changing trend for associations and their journals. So maybe you can talk to us about what open access is.
Sure. So open access is defined as research outputs such as journal articles, books, scientific data, conference proceedings, and they're available online with no restrictions and on access, and no or limited restrictions on use other than requiring acknowledgement of the original author. So as you said, it's absolutely game-changing, and it's certainly had more traction in Europe, and it's well on its way here.
Well, Sharon, let's unpack that a little bit. So it's the funders that have really pushed for open access. So the U.S. federal government, European funders, basically what they're saying is, look, if I'm going to fund this research, I don't want to restrict the output. I want the greatest possible number of people able to access the research, presumably for the common good. So it's the funders that are pushing for this. And tell us how it's affecting the business strategy for associations and societies.
Right. So originally, journals were funded through subscriptions, and we use the clearinghouses. It used to be EBSCO. Sometimes it's your publisher. At AAPM, we use Oxford University Press as our publisher, and it was primarily funded through advertising because journals were in print, and primarily through subscriptions. So the subscription model becomes obsolete if you're going to be getting your journals for free for 100% open access. So that really begs the question of how are you going to fund your journal going forward? Well, one of the strategies is publish more, and the author becomes the customer because the author is paying some type of paid charges or a manuscript charge in order to have their articles published, which means the volume is down in terms of subscription versus authors, and you have to rethink how you're going to fund the journal going forward. The funders, from their perspective, as we said, they think they've paid for it, they wanted open access. The one piece of the puzzle that's missing or is still being figured out is who's going to pay for it. There's a cost to publishing a journal. There's a lot of services we provide: peer review, editorial processing, cleaning up charts so that they're appropriate. So there's a lot of work that goes into it, and that piece of the equation, in my opinion, is not really being considered fully with this push to open access.
Wow, Sharon, I've interviewed lots of association CEOs, and I've worked with many clients, and I've got one client who said, Joanna, member value is really a big deal. Our journal is one of the biggest drivers of membership. So open access, even if, say, half the articles become open access, because there is such a thing as hybrid, right? Where in a single issue of a journal, you might have some articles that are freely open and some that are subscription. And they're saying this is really going to change the value of membership. So talk to us about AAPM. You've got a journal. Tell us about the journal.
So our journal is a clinically focused journal. The pain medicine space is very busy. There's about 15 different societies that claim some piece of pain medicine. The American Academy of Pain Medicine is a multidisciplinary, interdisciplinary profession. In other words, we don't just focus on neuromodulation. We don't focus just on spinal intervention. We look at behavioral science, so the psychology of pain. We all perceive pain differently, and what might work for me as a patient, it may not work for you as a patient. So that clinical focus is really important to us. We are a hybrid journal. We do offer open access, but we also have subscriptions for our journal. But we also fund it in two additional ways. One way is that we are the primary journal for another society, ANZACA, which is the Australian New Zealand Anesthesiology, College of Anesthesiology. So they pay for a subscription for all of their members annually. In addition to that, for us, we do supplements, paid supplements. One that we're currently just put to bed and will be coming out next year is a supplement on neuropathic pain. And that was sponsored by two different companies, Silex and Averitas. And it's unrestricted. In other words, they can't determine the content. It still has to go through peer review, but it helps fund it. And so with our contract with OUP, we get a percentage of all the revenue above the baseline to help cover our costs for editorial.
Wow, Sharon. So for an organization that has a journal that previously was all restricted, they're basically facing pressure from funders. Is this trend growing that articles are becoming open access? Like what percentage of articles is now open access? Is that growing or increasing?
It's absolutely increasing. As we talked about there was a really great graph in our presentation that showed the exponential growth in terms of open access. So it's really not a matter of if, but when. And every organization's going to have to look at it differently. So we're trying to kick the can down the road a little bit further because our primary source of revenue is our annual meeting. But the journal is important to us. We're the Academy of Pain Medicine, which means that we are academic in our focus. We care about basic science. We care about translational science, especially as it relates to practicing in the clinic. So it's important to our members. So everybody's going to have to figure it out. I believe one of our colleagues who presented yesterday, it's their number one benefit.
Right.
So they've really got to look at their strategy and cascading journals and how they're going to manage that. We've talked about it. For the Academy, we're focused on higher level strategy first, and then incorporating the journal strategy will be a part of that. I have initiated conversations with our editor-in-chief to say, okay, what's the plan? What are we doing? For us right now, open access is not sustainable, so we're not going to do it right now. We'll do the hybrid.
Interesting. So during the session, there were some strategies that you as the panelist talked about, and one of them was to publish more articles. So why is that a strategy?
Because of the page fees or whatever the APCs, everybody has a different term.
That stands for author processing
charge. APC, yeah, author processing charge. Some people charge per page, some charge per flat article for a manuscript. The reason that you have to publish more is you have to make up that volume for all the libraries that may have been subscribing to you that are no longer subscribing because it's open access. And the subscription base is much larger than the base that's been publishing. So to start making up that revenue, you need to publish more papers. To publish more papers, you need to be able to go to market more quickly because the PIs, principal investigators, want to get their research out and published. I think it's going to be a really delicate balance in terms of quality versus quantity.
Well, Sharon, there's a cost to all of this because you might be publishing or accepting more papers, but they have to go through peer review. It has to go through editorial. It has to be laid out. So this isn't free.
No, it's not free.
Wow. There was another strategy that we talked about, which is for organizations that are self-publishing. One strategy was to partner with one of the publishing houses. So what's your strategy? I think you're partnered with Oxford University Press.
We are. So a lot of the contracts are structured where there is a baseline, a guaranteed minimum in terms of what you receive to help support your journal. And it's typically under the category of editorial support. And that would be to support your editor-in-chief if you have a managing editor, and whether or not you pay stipends to any of your reviewers and your editorial board. So for us, we get a percentage above and beyond that. Last year, we did better than we thought. This year, a little bit less, but still better than the previous year. But a lot of that difference in revenue for us is more about our supplements than it is about subscriptions. So I'm a little bit inspired after our session with our colleagues. I'm actually going to go back to my office and put together a spreadsheet. And I'm going to lay out the revenue by types of revenue in a spreadsheet and then turn it into a graph so we can visualize trends. I find that when I present data visually to the board, they tend to do a little bit better instead of like zeroing in on one particular line item. Their job is to look at the trends and make decisions. So I think that's going to be my next step.
Boy, that's really good advice to visualize it. You talked about supplements as a strategy. So what is a supplement?
So in our space, it could be related to different areas within, like I like to say, we're a mile wide and an inch deep. We appeal to neuroscientists. We appeal to PM&R, which is physical movement and rehabilitation doctors, anesthesiologists who come to pain. But we also are dealing with behavioral medicine. So PhDs who are helping with opioid addiction and step down, and also looking at patient selection. So for example, I think the most recent one was on neuromodulation. So what we can do, some of the topics under an issue might be, what is the mechanism of action for treatment? We're looking at a low back pain one where we're looking at multifidus dysfunction, but that's too narrow. So we're really going to be taking a look at restorative. What do you do to restore function? What do you do to restore muscle function in something that's based on physical movement and rehabilitation? And it gets into the science behind it. And then we also will take it then to somewhat a translational place where we're talking about how to apply that mechanism of action. What are the different therapies that are available for a specific condition, and put that in a printed supplement.
I see. But Sharon, why wouldn't the supplement then be subject to open access rules?
Because it's paid for by it's actually paid for, and it is open access.
I see.
Subscribers get a copy of it, but we put that out there.
But the supplement is paid for by somebody.
Correct. So in the case of the neuropathic pain, Silex Holdings and Averitas Pharma are paying for the supplements. And then they have choices. So they work directly with the publisher. They get a percentage, we get a percentage. And then we get a guest editor. They put together a table of contents. We figure out about how many pages it's going to be, and then they work on a price. Then they can pay for reprints if they want additional reprints to give to their sales field or their patients. And that's how we put together the price.
Wow. Sharon, thank you so much for sharing the strategy behind your open access hybrid strategy at AAPM. We will put links in the show notes to the different organizations that were part of our panel. I'll also, listeners, put a link in the show notes to the slides, because I think there's some really great visuals for the open access trends. And you can find Sharon on LinkedIn if you want to reach out to her and learn more about what AAPM is doing. Sharon, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for listening to Associations Thrive. We're so glad to have you here. You know, my personal mission and the mission of my company, Matrix Group International, is to help associations and nonprofits increase membership, generate revenue, and thrive in the digital space. I want to hear stories of how your organization is thriving in today's challenging landscape. Please apply to be on my show by going to podcast.matrixgroup.net. By the way, do you need help with a digital initiative? Maybe it's a website redesign, a new membership database, or a hybrid meeting that you're planning. I'd love to connect with you. Please visit the Matrix Group website at matrixgroup.net. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode of Associations Thrive. Don't forget to subscribe to the show, leave a 5-star rating, post a comment, and share it with your colleagues and friends. Bye!